Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of those stories that starts like a fairy tale and then swerves sharply into, oh no, I definitely don't want to be there. You're standing in the echoing hall of a medieval palace, tapestries fluttering in the draft, courtiers whispering like pigeons in a barn. And in the middle of all that, a boy who has no idea the crown settling on his head is about to make his life both glittering and unbearable. You probably won't survive this one if you try swapping places with him. Medieval politics chewed through people like a bad set of dentures. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're tuning in from tonight. Drop your location and the local time in the comments, because nothing's more fun than seeing bedtime stretch across the globe like a rolling wave. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1307, and you're not some random peasant hauling turnips to market. Lucky you. Instead, you're standing in the heavy shoes of Edward of Caernarfon, the fourth son of Edward Durfern, better known as Longshanks to history nerds, and the guy who made Mel Gibson angry in Braveheart to movie buffs. Edward the First was the sort of king who could terrify a room simply by entering it. Tall, iron-fisted, obsessed with war. He'd spent decades trying to hammer Scotland into submission, and in July of that year, after one final exhausting campaign up north, Longshanks gave up the ghost at Burgh by Sands. That's when everything changed. You, Edward II, just 23 years old, suddenly carried the weight of the crown. Except, unlike that, you're not a warrior colossus. You're softer in build, fond of music and swimming, more likely to be caught hanging out with your friends than polishing armor. Right away, you feel the difference between expectation and reality. Courtiers eye you sideways. Chroniclers later describe you as unlike his father in every respect, which, honestly, is medieval code for, uh-oh, this guy is not going to fit the mold. And oh, the mold is heavy. Kings in the early 14th century weren't just figureheads. They were expected to lead men into battle, ride endlessly across muddy roads to dispense justice, and marry advantageously to keep dynasties stitched together. You'd rather host jousts and spend time with that charming Gascon noble Piers Gaveston, who already has every baron at court muttering. The coronation day itself is a shimmering blur. Westminster Abbey thunders with chant and incense, gold cloth draped over stone. The crown of St. Edward is lowered onto your head, and it feels far heavier than anyone admits, like a medieval version of signing a contract without reading the fine print. The fine print, in your case, is that almost everyone in the room thinks they can manage you better than you can manage yourself. The mainstream historical fact here: Edward II was indeed the first English monarch to be given the title Prince of Wales in his youth, a move by his father to cement dominance over the recently conquered Welsh. That's part of why his coronation carried symbolic weight. He was supposed to embody unity over a still fractious realm. And yet, the quirky detail: Edward really loved manual crafts. Chroniclers note he enjoyed rowing boats, digging ditches, even thatching roofs, activities that made noblemen roll their eyes so hard they nearly fell over. Imagine a king today being criticized for mowing his own lawn. Same energy, but right away, trouble lurks. The great magnates, the earls and barons, are used to Edward the Run cracking skulls. They watch you laugh too freely with Gaveston, distribute favors like candy, and they think, maybe we can push this boy around. Historians still argue whether Edward II's failures as king were baked in from the beginning, whether personality doomed him, or whether, with different allies, he might have succeeded. You try at first to play the part. You tour the kingdom, shaking hands, smiling at bishops who smell faintly of incense and old wine. You arrange your marriage to Isabella of France, daughter of the powerful King Philip IV, sealing a glittering alliance. But even this triumph feels double-edged. She's just 12 at the time of the betrothal, and you're already giving all your affection elsewhere. Court gossip spreads like spilled ink, and even on your happiest day, shadows already cling. Think about it. You've inherited not only a crown, but also wars, debts, and a baronial class that expects to control you. The abbey bells ring, the people cheer, but under that noise, there's a tremor, the beginning of a reign that historians will describe as one of the most disastrous in medieval England. And yet, in this moment, you can almost believe in fairy tales. The crown fits, the robes glitter, and for a few heartbeats, you feel like you're stepping into greatness. But you and I both know the glitter won't last. The cheers of your coronation still ring faintly in your ears. But even as the incense smoke lingers in Westminster, another scent fills the air. Whispers. They coil around the court like lazy snakes. The king and Gaveston, too close, far too close. And you know what? They're not entirely wrong. You grew up with Piers Gaveston like a brother. Or, more accurately, like that one friend your parents insisted was a bad influence, while you were sneaking out of lessons together. Born in Gascony, Piers wasn't of royal blood, but he had everything else that could light up a medieval hall. Charm, confidence, impeccable taste in clothes, and just enough arrogance to strut past earls as though he owned the place. To you, he's not just a companion, he's oxygen. When you're with him, the weight of the crown eases. He jokes with you, calls you out when you're sulking, and shares in your loves, music, feasting, the thrill of a joust. For a young man suddenly burdened with a kingdom, Gaveston is freedom wrapped in silk. But here's the problem. Medieval politics didn't run on friendship. It ran on patronage, hierarchy, and keeping the nobility convinced they were more important than they actually were. The minute you start showering peers with titles and gifts, the entire aristocracy feels the ground shift beneath them. Suddenly, they're not the king's trusted circle. The Gascon upstart is, and you go all in. You give Gaveston the earldom of Cornwall, a position so prestigious that barons choke on their wine hearing it. To them, it's like you handed a golden scepter to some flashy party crasher. Gaveston rides through London, dressed like he owns the place, throwing tournaments that dazzle crowds and irritate nobles. Chroniclers later describe him as witty, to the point of cruelty, coining nicknames for great lords that stuck like burrs. Imagine being the proud Earl of Warwick and having your king's favorite call you the Black Dog of Arden in front of half the court. Not exactly a recipe for warm feelings. The mainstream historical fact: Edward II really did elevate Gaveston to Earl of Cornwall in 1307, a position usually reserved for members of the royal family. It sent shockwaves through the nobility, signaling that Gaveston wasn't just a companion, he was the power behind the throne. And here's the quirky tidbit: Gaveston was so dazzling at jousts and pageantry that he became a trendsetter. Young men at court copied his clothing, his manner of speech, even his way of carrying a sword. He was medieval England's equivalent of a celebrity influencer, minus the Instagram account. And oh, the court poets didn't miss the chance to stir the pot. Ballads and whispered rhymes circulated, painting you and Gaveston as inseparable in ways that medieval moralists raised their eyebrows at. Historians still argue whether Edward and Piers were lovers in the modern sense, or simply bound by an unusually intense friendship. The truth lies buried under centuries of gossip. But what's certain is this: everyone around you thought it was suspicious. Picture the scene: candlelit feasts where you lean a little too close to Piers, while earls glower across the table. Hunting trips where you laugh at his jokes and ignore the scowling lords trudging through the mud behind. Council meetings where your attention drifts toward him rather than the grim-faced men demanding policy. Every glance becomes fuel for rumor, and while you bask in this camaraderie, a storm gathers. Nobles hate losing influence. Worse, they hate being mocked. Each new gift, each new honor you lavish on Gaveston is a thorn in their pride. By indulging your friendship so openly, you're doing more than breaking unspoken rules. You're poking a stick at a nest of barons who have swords, armies, and centuries of entitlement. But you don't see it. Or maybe you do, and you just don't care. Because after years under the iron shadow of your father, this friendship feels like sunlight. It's intoxicating. And like most intoxicating things, it's about to come with a brutal hangover. If you thought The Crown would turn your court into a harmonious medieval sitcom, spoiler alert, it didn't. In fact, now that the honeymoon period of your early reign is over, you're starting to see just how many daggers are hidden beneath all those embroidered sleeves. The year is sliding into 1308, and while you're still flush with the glow of youth and the delight of having Piers Gaveston back by your side, the rest of the nobility is, how do we put this gently, absolutely seething. The palace is a kaleidoscope of glittering banners, polished armor, and robes so heavily embroidered they could probably stand upright on their own. The great hall smells of roasted meats, beeswax candles, and that faint tang of incense left over from the wedding you just had with Isabella of France. A marriage that was supposed to secure an unbreakable Anglo-French alliance. But instead of unity, your court is fracturing, and the fault line runs straight through you. Everywhere you look, there's gold and music and dazzling tournaments. You've turned the court into a playground of pageantry. Knights ride in full regalia just to impress the onlookers. Banquets last until the candles are stubs. You give out titles like they're party favors. And at the center of it all, you and Piers, laughing over cups of Gascon wine, inventing new games, planning more tournaments. To you, this is the good life. Finally, a chance to enjoy being king without being constantly compared to your warhammer-wielding father. But for the highborn lords, it's like watching their inheritance being fed to a peacock. The mainstream historical fact here: Edward II's court became notorious for its extravagance and favoritism, especially toward Gaveston. Chroniclers record that the king's patronage of Gaveston alienated many of the most powerful nobles in England, including the Earls of Lancaster, Warwick, and Hereford. They weren't just annoyed, they were actively insulted. And here's the quirky tidbit: Gaveston had such a sharp tongue that he gave mocking nicknames to the great lords. The Earl of Lincoln was called Burst Belly, Warwick became the Black Dog, and Lancaster, arguably the most powerful man in England after the king, was the Fiddler. Imagine being a medieval warlord with land stretching across the kingdom and having the king's bestie reduce you to a punchline. You'd be furious, and they were. You host a tournament at Wallingford. It's a spectacle. Banners snapping in the wind, trumpets blaring, armored knights charging at each other like runaway carriages. The crowds love it. You love it. Gaveston, naturally, steals the show with a perfectly timed lance strike and a winning smile. But in the shadows, the earls mutter. They're not stupid. They see where the real power lies. You consult Gaveston on state matters. You reward him with more land, more titles, more influence. And every favor you give him is one less given to them. It's not just personal, it's political. Historians still argue whether Edward II genuinely believed that elevating Gaveston would strengthen the crown by placing loyal friends in high positions, or whether he was simply blind to the consequences. Maybe it was a bit of both. Meanwhile, Isabella, your new queen, is watching all this with the calm calculation of a 12-year-old who's already been trained in royal politics. She's the daughter of Philip IV of France, a man so ruthless they called him the Iron King. She was raised to understand power, and she sees how little of it you're sharing with her. She notices how you dote on Gaveston, how your affection for your friend eclipses your attention to her. She's a child, yes, but she's also a princess, and she remembers everything. The French delegation that escorted her to England, they notice too, and when they return home, they'll whisper in Philip's ear, "Your daughter has been set aside. The king prefers another." Not a good look. Back in your court, the nobles start meeting in quiet corners. Letters are exchanged. Alliances forged in candlelit chambers. The grudge is growing teeth, and you're too busy planning the next feast to notice that it's sharpening them. One evening, you hold a banquet so lavish that people will talk about it for years. Peacocks are served with their feathers reattached, so they look alive on the platter. Musicians play until their fingers cramp. There's dancing, jesters, fountains of wine. And somewhere in the corner, Lancaster watches you laugh at one of Gaveston's jokes. He doesn't smile. He just nods once to a fellow earl. The game is beginning. You'd think, as king, you could hang out with whomever you liked. You wear the crown. You sit on the throne. You sign the charters. Why shouldn't you spend your evenings laughing with Piers Gaveston over a goblet of Gascon wine? But medieval politics wasn't about personal freedom. It was about keeping a precarious pyramid of power balanced. And right now, you're tilting it dangerously. By 1308, the barons have had enough of the glitter, the jokes, and the endless string of favors that Gaveston keeps pocketing. They've been grumbling for months, but now the grumbling turns into action. A council of magnates gathers, and the pressure begins to squeeze. To them, Gaveston isn't just an annoying upstart. He's a threat to the entire noble order, and they have leverage. You're newly married to Isabella of France, and your shiny alliance with the French crown could collapse if you're seen as unsteady. The barons whisper into the ears of bishops, who whisper into the ears of the Pope. And before long, exile is on the table. Imagine the sting. You've just put the crown on your head. You're barely settling into the role. And the nobility essentially says, that guy, he goes, or we'll make sure you regret it. The mainstream historical fact. In 1308, under immense pressure, Edward II was forced to send Piers Gaveston into exile. This wasn't a polite vacation. It was a humiliating reminder that the king's power was not absolute. The ordinances of 1311, drafted soon after, would hammer home the idea that the king's rule had to be checked by his barons. But you, Edward, are nothing if not stubborn. When Gaveston leaves, you're heartbroken. Chroniclers describe how you lavished him with gifts, even as he sailed away, practically stuffing his pockets with silver before the ship pulled out. The quirky tidbit here: Gaveston apparently left with so much treasure that people joked he could buy half of Aquitaine with it. Exile never looked so well funded. The nobles congratulate themselves. They've clipped your wings, curbed your excess, reminded you who's boss. They think they've won. Except, here's the thing. You're still king, and you're still young, passionate, and not exactly keen on playing by their rules. Within a year, you start maneuvering. Letters fly across the channel. Promises are whispered in secret meetings. And before long, Gaveston is back. Because what's exile to a king, determined to have his way? The reunion is a pageant all its own. Gaveston rides through London like a conquering hero. Banners flying, armor gleaming, and you're right there beside him, grinning like a teenager sneaking out of school. The barons? They're livid. They didn't just remove Gaveston for the fun of it. They did it to protect their own power. And now, he's back, stronger and flashier than ever. Historians still argue whether Edward brought Gaveston back out of pure emotional need, or because he genuinely believed Gaveston was the best man to help him govern. Either way, the result is the same. The court erupts again in glitter and grudge, and Gaveston, true to form, doesn't play it safe. He mocks the lords again, struts around tournaments, collects more honors. You're dazzled, but your nobles are now beyond irritation. They're plotting. One evening, during another grand feast, Gaveston raises a goblet and makes some sharp quip at Lancaster's expense. You laugh, wine spilling down your sleeve. But across the hall, Lancaster's hand curls into a fist. The jokes that once seemed harmless now carry the weight of open insult. The exile had been a warning shot. Now, with Gaveston's return, the barons are loading the cannons. You've played the game recklessly, and for a while, it seemed like you were winning. Gaveston was back. The court sparkled with tournaments again, and you carried on as though the barons' muttering was just background noise. But this isn't background noise anymore. It's a drumbeat, growing louder until you can't ignore it. By 1311, your kingdom's most powerful magnates, men like Thomas of Lancaster, Humphrey de Bohun of Hereford, and Guy de Beauchamp of Warwick, are tired of jokes, tired of favoritism, tired of being sidelined by the Gascon they despise. They gather in solemn assembly and draft what becomes known as the Ordinances of 1311, 31 articles designed to shackle your power and make sure no king can do as he pleases ever again. You sit there, crown heavy on your head, listening as they read out the rules. No more foreign favorites. No more unchecked royal spending. No more arbitrary decisions. Gaveston, once again, is banished. And this time, it's official, carved into political stone. It feels like chains. You're still king in name, but your hands are tied. The nobles call it reform. You call it humiliation. Imagine being told at your own throne that you need adult supervision. The mainstream historical fact, the Ordinances of 1311 were a landmark moment in English constitutional history, curbing royal authority and empowering the barons in a way that foreshadowed later struggles between crown and parliament. They were, essentially, an early version of king. You're on probation, and the quirky tidbit, among the restrictions was a rule forbidding you from leaving the kingdom without baronial consent. The idea of a monarch having to ask permission for a vacation is almost laughable. Edward II, King of England, reduced to something like a child needing a hall pass. But you don't laugh. You seethe. And despite the ink drying on the ordinances, you don't intend to play by the Baron's rules. Your loyalty to Gaveston outweighs political caution. With a snap of your fingers, you recall him yet again. The Gascon swaggerer returns, grinning like exile is just a mild inconvenience. And once more, you're inseparable. Feasts, hunts, tournaments, business as usual. As though the ordinances never existed. This time, though, the magnates move beyond parchment. They gather troops. Castles bristle with armed men. England teeters toward open civil conflict. Not over a foreign enemy, but over whether its own king is fit to rule. Picture the tension. Roads crawling with armored riders. Villages buzzing with rumors. Banners being unfurled in smoky great halls. You, Edward, remain stubborn, convinced that the dignity of the crown demands resistance. But the reality is, your kingdom is slipping from your grasp. And then comes the blow. Gaveston is hunted, cornered, dragged from sanctuary, despite your desperate protests. He's paraded like a criminal, while you, King of England, are forced to stand by, impotent as your barons dictate terms. It's not just exile this time, it's capture, and you're next on their list. Historians still argue whether Edward's stubborn devotion to Gaveston was an act of love blinding him to political reality, or whether he truly believed defying the ordinances was his duty as king. Either way, the result is the same. You find yourself penned in, your authority hollow, your throne ringed by men who see you as a pawn. A king in chains isn't just a metaphor. It's the lived reality of your reign. You're crowned in gold, but every link of iron your barons slap onto your rule grows heavier. And the worst part? You can feel it. They're not just coming for Gaveston this time. They're coming for you. You've been warned before. Subtly, politely. Sometimes not so politely. But this time, the storm is real. The nobility has run out of patience, and the barons are sharpening not only their swords, but also their sense of vengeance. And in the center of their fury is the man you've refused to give up, Piers Gaveston. It happens in 1312. You're clinging desperately to your companion, your brother in everything but blood, the glitter at your otherwise grim court. The ordinances said he had to go. The earls demanded he vanish. And you, stubborn as ever, brought him back again. Now you both pay the price. The chase is relentless. Gaveston flees north with only a handful of followers, hoping to find sanctuary in Scarborough Castle. The sea air there bites at the stones, and for a moment, it feels like he might be safe behind its walls. But the magnates close in with grim determination. Warwick, Lancaster, and Pembroke leading the charge, their banners snapping like angry jaws in the wind. The mainstream historical fact: Gaveston surrendered under promises of safe conduct. The Earl of Pembroke, Aymer de Valence, personally guaranteed that Piers would be treated fairly and kept alive until proper judgment. That promise lasted about as long as snow in July. Here's the quirky tidbit. Chroniclers claim that Warwick, nicknamed the Black Dog of Arden, was so enraged at Gaveston's mockery that he personally took charge of the prisoner, dragging him from his guards as though he were snatching a toy away from a child. Imagine a medieval noble frothing so hard about an insult that he tosses out the rule book just to settle the score. And so Gaveston is hauled south, through villages where people whisper and stare at the once dazzling favorite, now riding in chains. You, Edward, are scrambling, pleading, trying to rally support. But it's too late. The lords don't want negotiations. They want blood. They bring him to Warwick Castle. No pomp, no trial worthy of the name, just a knot of barons in a grim hall deciding his fate. The verdict? Death. The charge? Being Gaveston. That's it. His popularity with you, his arrogance, his nicknames, his audacity to rise above his station. These are crimes enough for men whose pride has been bruised raw. Picture the scene. A June evening, shadows lengthening across Blacklow Hill. Piers Gaveston, once the glittering center of tournaments, kneels in the dirt. He's handed over to a pair of Welsh soldiers, executioners without ceremony. A sword is raised, sunlight flashing off its edge. And with a brutal stroke, the head that once turned so many eyes rolls into the grass. Historians still argue whether his death was legally sanctioned murder, or an act of cold-blooded revenge outside all law. The chronicles differ, and each baron later tried to justify himself. But in truth, it was raw vengeance, wrapped in a thin cloak of necessity. And you, Edward, you're devastated. You rage, you mourn, you curse the magnates. Chroniclers note how your grief turned to fury, how you vowed vengeance against those who robbed you of your dearest companion, but you're powerless to bring him back. His body is eventually returned to you, and you bury him with honors, trying to cover brutality with dignity. For a kingdom, it was a moment of political reckoning. For you, it was personal heartbreak. The laughter you shared, the tournaments, the whispered conversations, they're gone, snuffed out by men who saw him as a poison in your reign. And yet, his absence leaves not emptiness, but a void to be filled. Soon enough, others will rush to that space, eager to be the next favorite, the next man who whispers into the king's ear. But none of them will shine the way Gaveston did, and none of them will ever leave quite the same scar. The death of Gaveston is more than the end of a friendship. It's the moment your reign fractures beyond repair. The barons have tasted blood. They know they can act, even against the king's chosen. And you? You've just learned what happens when a monarch loves someone more than politics will allow. The torches gutter low in Westminster's halls, and the laughter that once spilled from your feasts is a memory swallowed by silence. Piers Gaveston is gone, cut down in the grass by men who call themselves your loyal subjects. The wound doesn't close. You pace chambers heavy with tapestries, whispering his name, vowing vengeance under your breath. But even as you drown in grief, another figure waits in the wings, calm, patient, and sharper than you realize. Isabella of France, your queen. She entered your life as little more than a girl. Married to you in 1308, she was just 12, hardly old enough to carry the weight of a crown. But Isabella was no ordinary child bride. She was the daughter of Philip IV, the Iron King of France, a ruler famed for his cold brilliance. Isabella was raised in a court where power was spoken in whispers, and strategy was a second language. She watched, she listened, and she learned. At first, you barely noticed her. You were absorbed in Gaveston, in tournaments, in your glittering, reckless court. Isabella was a piece of political theater, a bridge between kingdoms. To you, she was background. To her, that was fine. She could wait. The mainstream historical fact. Isabella would one day earn the nickname She-Wolf of France for her ruthlessness. But at this stage, she plays the part of dutiful queen with perfect composure. She smiles when required, stands beside you at ceremonies, and nods when bishops intone blessings. Outwardly, she's the model of loyalty. Inwardly, she's taking stock. And here's the quirky tidbit. Despite her young age, Isabella had a love for lavish fashion. Chronicles describe her wearing gowns embroidered with gold and pearls, headdresses glittering with gemstones that caught candlelight like a blaze. At your court, where ostentation was already a sport, she managed to make even your feasts look a little brighter. If you and Gaveston turned the hall into a playground, Isabella added the shine of a fashion runway. Still, she noticed your neglect, the way you whispered to Gaveston while ignoring her at banquets. She noticed how barons muttered about your obsession, how your reputation crumbled in their eyes. And she remembered how her father drilled into her that power is not given, it's taken. Now Gaveston is dead. You are adrift, mourning, furious at the barons. And Isabella? She waits. She offers comfort, the soft-spoken support of a wife. She kneels beside you in chapel, hands clasped in prayer. She murmurs words of solace, her eyes lowered, her voice steady. But inside, she understands. This is the moment where her role can shift. Historians still argue whether Isabella's early years as your queen were truly patient loyalty, or whether she quietly harbored resentment from the very beginning. Some suggest she tried earnestly to be a partner. Others, that she bided her time, her loyalty already brittle. For now, though, she plays the long game. She becomes the dutiful mother-to-be, producing heirs that cement her place. She walks the fine line between French interests and English realities, smoothing edges where your temper frays. She builds alliances with clerics and nobles, who see in her a steadier hand than the one you place so stubbornly on the crown. Picture her, a young queen in velvet and pearls, face serene, eyes sharp as flint. She sits at your side while you rage about Lancaster and Warwick, her fingers curling calmly in her lap. She says little, but she files everything away. The court sees her patience. They see her calm. They begin to wonder quietly if perhaps the French princess is made of stronger metal than the English king she married. And though you don't know it yet, Edward, Isabella will one day be the storm you never expected, the queen who stops waiting and begins to act. The north wind is crueler than the sneers of your barons. It bites through mail and cloak alike, rattling banners that hang limp over mud-soaked fields. You, Edward of Caernarfon, King of England, ride north with a swelling host, determined to put an end to the thorn in England's side. Robert the Bruce, that stubborn King of Scots, who refuses to bend the knee. But Edward, oh Edward, you're not your father. Edward de Rure, Longshanks, the hammer of the Scots, had marched north with iron resolve and left fire in his wake. You march north with the echoes of your father's shadow looming over every step. The barons mutter it aloud now. Edward is no Longshanks, and Scotland proves them right. It's 1314. You gather what is, by all accounts, one of the largest English armies ever assembled for the northern campaign. Knights glitter in steel. The ground trembles under the hooves of destriers, and the baggage train stretches so long it looks like a moving village. You mean to crush Bruce, once and for all, to seize Stirling Castle, and remind both your barons and your enemies that Edward the Cent wears a crown not made of straw. The Scots are fewer, ragged even, but wily. Bruce does not meet you on open ground where your cavalry can thunder through ranks. Instead, he chooses the field of Bannockburn, a narrow stretch near a little brook, treacherous with mud, hemmed in by woods and marsh. You don't see the trap at first. You see a prize waiting to be taken, and then humiliation. The battle is chaos. English knights charge, but they're funneled into the narrow ground and broken against the Scottish schiltrons, rows of men bristling with long spears, like a hedgehog of iron. Horses rear, knights topple, banners fall into the muck. The English pride, The cavalry that had thundered across Europe breaks like waves against a cliff. There is a moment you will never forget. Robert the Bruce himself rides forward, armed with nothing more than an axe. A Scottish knight named Henry de Bohun lowers his lance and charges at him, thinking he'll end the rebellion with one glorious thrust. But Bruce sidesteps and cleaves Bohun's skull with a single blow. The Scots cheer, the English tremble. The tide turns. By nightfall, the unthinkable has happened. The great English host is broken, your army scattered like frightened deer. Chroniclers say the rout was so complete that the road north was littered with discarded armor, banners, even noblemen trampled under their own retreating troops. Edward, King of England, you flee. You abandon the field, your crown stained not with glory, but with mud and shame. Scotland has not just beaten you, they've humiliated you. Here's your mainstream fact. The Battle of Bannockburn was Scotland's most famous victory, securing Robert the Bruce's kingship and ensuring Scottish independence for a generation. England would not truly recover its position in Scotland during your reign. And here's the quirky detail. The English baggage train was so enormous that when it was abandoned, Scottish peasants looted it for weeks. Imagine the scene. Simple farmers trudging home with silver cups, embroidered cloaks, and barrels of fine wine meant for England's nobles. Your royal disaster turned into Scotland's village festival. But here's the debate. Was Bannockburn lost because of your incompetence or because of baronial sabotage? Some historians suggest your commanders deliberately held back or refused to coordinate, letting the army fall into disarray just to weaken your reign further. Others argue you were simply outmaneuvered by Bruce, a king who knew the land, the tactics, and the moment. Either way, the whispers grow louder. You have failed where your father triumphed. You've let Scotland humiliate England. And Isabella, still the patient queen, watches as your pride buckles under the weight of defeat. The torchlight in your court burns dimmer after Bannockburn. The nobles grow restless. The crown sits heavier. And Edward, though you don't yet realize it, the road ahead will not lead to redemption in Scotland, but to betrayals much closer to home. You're reeling from Bannockburn, the mud still clinging to your boots, the echoes of your fleeing cavalry ringing in your ears. The court is tense, the barons restless, and yet, somehow, you find solace or distraction in a new companion, Hugh the Spencer, a man whose ambition is as sharp as Gaveston's charm once was. Unlike the flamboyant Gascon, the Spencer is calculating, subtle, a master of whispered influence rather than open spectacle. And you, Edward, fall for it. Again, it begins quietly. The Spencer is charming in a different way. He's attentive, clever, and always seems to know what to say to soothe your wounded pride. After Bannockburn, you're vulnerable, desperate for loyalty and support. The Spencer offers both. And unlike Gaveston, he doesn't mock the lords openly, at least not initially. To the king, he's the balm to a kingdom's fresh wounds, the quiet voice in the hall, reminding you that the crown is still yours. The mainstream historical fact. Hugh Despenser the Younger became Edward II's favorite after the death of Piers Gaveston, eventually gaining immense political influence and titles, including the Lordship of Glamorgan. His rise marked a turning point where royal favoritism once again alienated the barons, setting the stage for rebellion. And a quirky tidbit: Despenser was said to have an almost obsessive focus on property and lands. Chroniclers note that he would measure estates personally, inspect manors, and tally incomes as though he were playing a medieval Monopoly game. This fascination with land made him unusually effective at consolidating power, though it also fueled jealousy and distrust among other nobles who thought a favorite shouldn't be quite so meticulous. At first, Despenser's influence seems harmless, even helpful. He negotiates with unruly barons, smooths ruffled feathers, and whispers counsel that appears, at least superficially, in the realm's best interest. But slowly, Edward begins to lavish him with gifts and offices. Land is granted, titles conferred, positions previously reserved for earls or long-established nobles now fall to Despenser. The court watches, and the whispers begin. Historians still argue whether Edward's favoritism toward Despenser was a simple repeat of his mistakes with Gaveston, or whether the king genuinely relied on Despenser's political acumen to stabilize a kingdom in chaos. Some suggest Edward was simply drawn to strong personalities who reinforced his sense of self. Others see a more calculated choice, a pragmatic alignment after prior failures. Meanwhile, the barons grow restless. The scars of Bannockburn are still raw, and now another favorite's influence threatens to reopen old wounds. They grumble in council chambers, write letters in the candlelight, and plot quietly. You, oblivious to the depth of their resentment, continue to elevate Despenser, confident in the loyalty he brings. The Queen, Isabella, observes silently. She notes how Despenser consolidates influence, how he leans into Edward's insecurities, how the nobility increasingly whispers behind closed doors. She may be young, but she's far from naive. Already she's calculating, waiting for the moment when loyalty, ambition, and betrayal will intersect. And you? You are comforted, yet blind. Despenser is not Gaveston's flamboyant, risky charm. He's a quieter, more dangerous force. His rise is subtle but relentless, and by the time the barons realize the extent of his power, Edward II will be entangled in yet another cycle of favoritism, resentment, and rebellion, one that history will remember as a disaster in slow motion. The court is alive with glittering banners, whispered rumors, and strategic smiles, and somewhere in that web, Edward clings to the idea that Despenser is a friend, a counselor, a loyal heart in a kingdom that has already betrayed his first true companion. But power, as always, comes at a price. You've barely caught your breath from Scotland, and yet the real danger is no longer across the border. It's inside your own walls. Edward, the crown sits heavy, and for the first time, you feel the weight of English nobility staring daggers at your back rather than bows at your front. Bannockburn may have bruised your pride, but now your kingdom hums with a different threat. Your own barons. Hugh Despenser is at your side, his influence growing like ivy on a castle wall. You trust him implicitly, but the rest of the realm doesn't. They whisper in shadowed corridors. The king is under a spell, seduced by a favorite as dangerous as Gaveston once was. And this time, they're not wrong. The Spencer consolidates power with finesse, securing lands, offices, and loyalty from lesser nobles, while alienating the older, more established earls. The mainstream historical fact: by the mid-1310s, Edward II's reliance on Hugh Despencer the Younger and his father, Hugh Despencer the Elder, had created a sharp division between royal authority and the baronial class. Discontent among powerful nobles, including Thomas of Lancaster, Humphrey de Bohun, and others, escalated into open hostility. The tension wasn't just personal. It threatened the very stability of the kingdom. And the quirky detail? Chroniclers note that Despencer's obsession with property was so meticulous that he would personally inspect tenants' accounts, measure fields, and question peasants about rents. It's said he carried a small measuring rod, checking boundaries with the precision of a modern surveyor. While effective in consolidating power, it made the old earls feel spied upon, humiliated, and enraged in equal measure. The barons begin meeting in secret. Candlelight flickers on maps and lists of grievances, and one by one, alliances form. The former humiliated nobles of Bannockburn, Lancaster, Hereford, Warwick plot not just to curb Despencer's influence, but to remind Edward that the crown exists for the realm, not personal whims. The threat is subtle at first. A letter here, a petition there. But the undertones are sharp. When they convene openly, their voices are colder than any Scottish wind. Historians still argue whether these baronial plots were fueled primarily by political necessity, personal pride, or simple revenge. Did they truly act to protect England from misrule? Or were they taking advantage of Edward's weaknesses to expand their own authority? The truth is tangled, and much depends on perspective. Isabella watches quietly, a queen growing sharper with each courtly maneuver. She observes the barons plotting, Despencer's ambitions, and Edward's emotional reliance on his favorite. Her patience and attention to detail begin to hint at her eventual transformation from passive princess to political actor, a player who will later leverage these fractures in her own rise to power. Meanwhile, Edward, bruised from battle and grief-stricken from Gaveston's death, remains emotionally entangled with Despencer. You grant him lands, offices, and influence, blind to the growing resentment. The court's glitter now has a darker undertone, one of whispered conspiracies and simmering rage. Knights and nobles exchange sidelong glances. Servants murmur in kitchens. Chroniclers record the tension with a faint note of horror. Your enemies at home are patient. They watch, they wait, and they calculate. Every tournament, every feast, every favor you bestow on Despencer is another brick in the wall that separates you from the loyalty of your barons. And Edward, lost in loyalty and friendship, doesn't yet see the storm gathering in his own castle walls. By the time you realize it, it won't be just words. It will be open rebellion, betrayal, and a kingdom on the edge of civil war. And for you, Edward II, the hardest lesson of all is that the crown can't protect you from the ambitions of those who stand closest. The halls of Westminster are colder than usual. and not because of a winter wind. Isabella, your queen, has stopped waiting patiently. The playful, composed princess who once smiled politely at your distractions is now an instrument of quiet fury. You, Edward, have failed to notice the depth of her observations. Or perhaps you chose to ignore them, but she has been keeping score. And now the tally is clear. Your favoritism toward the Spencer has destabilized the realm, insulted your barons, and humiliated your crown. She doesn't confront you with yells or sweeping gestures. Isabella's fury is meticulous, deliberate, a slow burn that chills the air around her. She sits beside you in counsel, her eyes steady, voice measured, offering advice that sounds gentle but carries the weight of steel. Perhaps, my lord, she says, we should consider the Earl's grievances before they fester into rebellion. It's not just a suggestion, it's a warning wrapped in velvet. The mainstream historical fact: Isabella, daughter of Philip IV of France, grew into a politically astute queen, eventually leading an invasion of England against her husband and securing the deposition of Edward II. Her early observations of courtly corruption and favoritism were instrumental in shaping her later decisive actions. And the quirky tidbit: some chronicles describe Isabella taking up embroidery as a form of both patience and calculation. She would sew images of allegorical justice and virtue into tapestries while listening to council debates, almost as if weaving her political will into the very fabric of the court. Later, historians have noted this as both a pastime and a subtle message to those around her. She was watching, thinking, and waiting. The barons grow bolder. The dispensers, confident in the king's favor, make enemies faster than the snow melts in spring. Lands are seized, rival offices filled, and any attempts at negotiation are met with a shrug or a sly smile. Isabella observes all of it with a cold precision. She takes note of alliances forming, letters being exchanged in secret, and the ever-growing resentment bubbling among the nobles. Historians still argue whether Edward's failure to heed Isabella's counsel was due to personal weakness, emotional dependence on his favorites, or sheer inexperience. Likely, it was a combination: grief for Gaveston, pride wounded by Bannockburn, and a stubborn belief that the Spencer's loyalty outweighed any political risk. By now, Edward, you are emotionally tethered to the Spencer in ways that blind you to danger. The Queen's subtle fury is both a critique and a threat. Isabella is patient, but the frost in her demeanor hints at action. She has seen how favorites can ruin a king. Gaveston's death looms as both warning and precedent, and she intends not to be sidelined as another casualty of misplaced loyalty. At court, whispers about the Queen begin to circulate. Is she disapproving? Is she plotting? Is she in league with barons? Few can tell, because Isabella keeps her emotions tightly contained. She smiles, she nods, she prays, but she calculates with every gesture, every jewel on her gown, every embroidery she completes, every glance she casts at Edward is measured. You, meanwhile, continue to indulge the Spencer, offering lands, offices, and influence, unaware that the Queen's quiet fury is already aligning forces that will challenge both of you. Isabella's cold observation is like a mirror reflecting your failures back at you. But instead of shattering it with anger, she stores each reflection, filing it away for the decisive moment. The court is tense, the air thick with suspicion, and you, Edward III, are walking into a trap woven not by foreigners, not by Scottish kings, but by the very people closest to you, your barons, your queen, and the shadowy web of resentment and ambition you've ignored for too long. You might think that after Bannockburn, after Gaveston, after all the humiliation and whispers, you'd finally learn caution. But no, Edward, stubborn as ever, you're about to see that loyalty and affection can blind a king to a far larger danger. Isabella, your queen, has been simmering quietly, and now she's beginning to act. But even her patience has limits, and she's not moving alone. Enter Roger Mortimer, the man who will become the fulcrum of your downfall. Mortimer is an English noble with continental connections, a dashing figure hardened by imprisonment and exile in France after a failed rebellion. He's escaped, like a shadow slipping through the night, and he carries with him more than just a score to settle. He carries opportunity. Isabella sees that clearly, the mainstream historical fact. In 1323, Mortimer escaped captivity in the Tower of London and fled to France, where he allied with Isabella. Their collaboration eventually led to the invasion of England in 1326, the capture of Edward VII, and the execution of the Despensers. Mortimer's escape and exile were pivotal in giving Isabella both the time and the means to plot against you. And the quirky tidbit: some accounts suggest that Mortimer once disguised himself as a simple merchant to evade capture, traveling incognito through towns and villages while plotting his return. He is part strategist, part escape artist, and wholly determined, qualities that make him both formidable and, to Edward, invisible until the last moment. Isabella reaches out to Mortimer with careful letters and coded messages. Each word is chosen with precision, each sentence a signal. She promises not only personal vengeance, but also political restoration. Mortimer, cunning and ambitious, sees in Isabella both an ally and a path to power. The two form a bond that is at once strategic, personal, and eventually lethal to your reign. Historians still argue whether Isabella's initial overtures to Mortimer were primarily personal, romantic even, or purely political. Some claim their alliance was born of mutual affection and shared ambition, while others insist it was entirely calculated. A marriage of convenience in the grand game of English power. Either way, the results are the same. Meanwhile, in your court, you continue to trust Despenser implicitly. You grant him lands, offices, and favor, blind to the baronial networks forming in the shadows. You fail to notice the letters exchanged across the channel, the secret meetings in French towns, and the careful plotting that turns your queen from patient observer into orchestrator of your undoing. Mortimer and Isabella communicate through coded messages, through secret envoys, and through carefully timed appearances in French courts. Every step is deliberate, funds secured, mercenaries hired, support from exiled English nobles gathered. The plan is slow, meticulous, almost invisible, yet deadly in its precision. And Edward, you remain on the throne, unaware. You see only Despenser's loyalty, the glittering pageantry of court life, the occasional letter from Isabella that you dismiss as routine politeness. The net is closing around you, not with swords yet, but with patience, strategy, and alliances forged in exile. The danger is real, though invisible. Mortimer is no Gaveston. He does not rely on charm or brashness. He relies on planning, patience, and the quiet gathering of power. Combined with Isabella's resolve, he represents a threat that Edward II is completely unprepared to confront. The stage is set. The Queen has her ally. The barons have their grievances. And your favorites have made enemies out of those who should be your staunchest supporters. If only you could see what's forming in the shadows. A coalition that will sweep the dispensers from power, dethrone a king, and leave Edward II facing consequences no glittering banquet could ever ward off. You wake to the sound of drums, Edward, but not the kind that signal a feast or tournament. These are the drums of discontent, echoing across your kingdom like the heartbeat of a beast you've ignored for too long. The barons you once relied on, the nobles you thought loyal, the very land you rule, they are rising. A realm in revolt is not an enemy at the border. It is everywhere, seeping into towns, fields, and courts, infecting England with murmurs of rebellion and ultimately war. The spark is the dispenser dominance. Hugh the Younger and his father have accumulated lands, offices, and influence at a rate that is breathtaking if you're admiring from the sidelines. But if you are anyone else, a baron, an earl, a marcher lord, it feels like theft. Not just a robbery of property, but a theft of power, respect, and the natural order of England. And the barons will not stand for it. Mainstream historical fact. By 1321-1322, Edward II faced what historians call the Dispenser War, a baronial revolt against the Dispenser's accumulation of power. The rebellion saw widespread skirmishes, castle sieges, and temporary exile of the Dispensers, though Edward eventually restored them after mustering loyal forces. Quirky tidbit: chroniclers note that during the revolt, one of the barons' symbols of defiance was bizarrely theatrical. A giant effigy of Hugh Dispenser was paraded through towns, mocked, and even pelted with rotten vegetables. The spectacle was part intimidation, part public ridicule, a medieval meme of scorn, if you will. The barons marshal their armies, negotiate secret alliances, and call on disaffected knights and minor lords to join the cause. They siege castles held by Dispenser loyalists, cut supply lines, and spread propaganda, subtly painting you, Edward, as a king who has abandoned his responsibilities in favor of personal attachments. Every town, every village that raises a banner against the Dispensers is a reminder your favoritism has consequences, and your crown is no longer unchallenged. Historians still argue whether Edward could have avoided the revolt by tempering Dispenser's influence, or whether the barons' ambition made conflict inevitable. Some suggest that with careful diplomacy and restraint, you might have navigated the grievances peacefully. Others claim that once Dispenser held sway, your reign was doomed to spark rebellion, no matter your actions. And Isabella? She watches from France and begins to understand the depth of your weakness. Mortimer, her ally and soon-to-be lover, communicates strategy and timing. They coordinate with exiled nobles and internal rebels alike. Your kingdom, Edward, is crumbling from within while you focus on loyalty to Dispenser, a loyalty that increasingly feels like a chain rather than a shield. The revolt is not just military, It's psychological. Your authority is questioned in every court, every council, and every hearth. The peasants gossip about the king who favors one man over the welfare of the realm. Your knights murmur at meals, casting sideways glances at the dispensers. The churchmen whisper in corridors about divine displeasure. You attempt to act, to rally loyal forces, to suppress insurrection. But every action seems reactive. Every maneuver anticipated by the coalition of barons, Isabella and Mortimer. The revolt spreads, consuming castles, towns, and hearts alike. The realm itself seems to breed rebellion. Every river, hill, and road a channel for unrest. In the end, Edward, you are king in name, but constantly beleaguered. The revolt is both a warning and a prelude, a signal that the crown cannot protect favorites at the expense of the kingdom, that personal loyalty cannot outweigh political reality, and that the seeds of betrayal are already growing in the soil of your reign. The kingdom shudders under the weight of rebellion, Edward, and you can feel it in every corner of your castle. The banners of defiance flutter mockingly outside your windows, and the walls themselves seem to echo with the anger of your own barons. Hugh Despenser the Younger and his father are no longer untouchable favorites. They are lightning rods for the kingdom's fury. And you, the king, are tethered to them in a way that leaves you exposed, vulnerable, and increasingly isolated. It starts with small defeats. Castles loyal to the Despensers fall to sieges, their gates battered by determined baronial forces. Supplies run low, and towns once obedient refuse to deliver taxes and provisions. Every act of favoritism that once seemed harmless now feels like a chain, dragging your throne down into chaos. You try to intervene, sending royal forces to rescue loyalists. But the numbers are against you. The Despenser's enemies are organized, determined, and merciless. Mainstream historical fact. In 1326, Isabella and Mortimer invaded England with a coalition that included disaffected barons, foreign mercenaries, and even English knights, loyal to the crown but resentful of Despenser influence. The Despensers were captured, tried, and executed, marking a decisive collapse of Edward II's inner circle and a dramatic shift in power. And the quirky tidbit. Chroniclers describe that the younger Despenser's execution was accompanied by his father's participation in ceremonial indignities, such as being forced to wear a mock crown of paper before their deaths. Even in death, the theatrical nature of their downfall was a reflection of the courtly excess and hubris that had contributed to their demise. Medieval politics had a flair for dramatics, and no one let the Despensers escape the ridicule they had inflicted in life. You are frantic, Edward. Your loyalty to them blinds you to strategy. Your grief clouds your judgment. Attempts to rally forces to protect them are patchy at best. Nobles who once considered themselves neutral now openly side with Isabella and Mortimer. The network you relied on has unraveled, revealing how tenuous your hold on power has become. Historians still argue whether Edward could have averted the fall of the Despensers by acting sooner to reconcile with the barons, or whether their influence had already alienated the realm beyond repair. Some see your failure as the product of personal attachment, others as the inevitable result of systemic weaknesses in your reign. Either way, the outcome is catastrophic. The Queen, Isabella, is no longer a silent observer. She is in command, coordinating movements, timing assaults, and ensuring that every step weakens the dispensers while preserving the broader legitimacy of her own future claim. You watch helplessly as your trusted favorites are cornered, and for the first time, you sense that your own reign is directly imperiled. The final days of the dispensers are swift and brutal. They are captured in Glamorgan, brought south to Hereford, and then London, and subjected to trials that serve less as justice and more as spectacle. Their execution is public, meant to send a clear message. No favorite, however close to the king, can defy the kingdom's collective will. You, Edward, are forced to witness this unraveling, powerless to intervene. The Baron's vengeance is precise, Isabella's strategy relentless, and Mortimer's cunning undeniable. What began as favoritism, a desire for loyalty and companionship, has become the undoing of your inner circle, and a signal that your throne is fragile, precarious, and vulnerable to betrayal from those closest to you. And yet, the king persists. You are still crowned, still the monarch in name, but your court is empty of the confidants who once guided your joy and decisions. The dispensers are gone, the realm is restless, and the path ahead is uncertain, paved with both resentment and opportunity. For Isabella, for Mortimer, and for the kingdom itself. The halls that once echoed with your laughter and the clatter of tournament armor now echo only with the footsteps of those who have turned against you. Edward, you walk through Westminster, feeling the crown on your head grow heavier with every whisper, every sidelong glance, every murmur of rebellion. The dispensers are dead. Isabella is no longer the patient observer, but the orchestrator of your undoing. And Mortimer, oh, Mortimer, is no longer a name whispered across the channel. He is here, a shadow looming over your throne, the mainstream historical fact. In 1326, Edward II was deposed by the combined forces of Queen Isabella and Roger Mortimer. Parliament formally recognized his removal, and his son, Edward III, was declared king, leaving you technically alive but stripped of authority. This deposition was unprecedented in England, a stark warning to future monarchs about the limits of royal power and favoritism. And the quirky tidbit: chroniclers recount that during the formal deposition, Edward wore his crown while being forced to kneel and submit to his own son's ascension. The surreal image of a king kneeling under the very crown he wore illustrates just how bizarrely ceremonial yet humiliating medieval power could become. It's the kind of visual that seems almost staged for a dramatic painting centuries later. Your allies are gone, your favorites executed or exiled. The barons who once muttered in private now parade through your court openly, their contempt thinly veiled by formalities. Desperate pleas to rally remaining loyalists are ignored. The crown you once wielded with confidence feels like a mockery, a metal circle of humiliation. Historians still argue whether Edward's deposition was inevitable given his failures, or whether different choices, especially limiting the power of his favorites, might have preserved his reign. Some see the Queen and Mortimer as opportunistic actors exploiting his weaknesses. Others as reformers, removing a monarch unfit to rule. You are escorted from Westminster to Kenilworth, ostensibly for protection, though it feels more like imprisonment. Each mile you travel, you sense the eyes of your former subjects and nobles upon you, measuring the fall of a king who once held the field at Bannockburn, who once lavished favor upon Gaveston, who once trusted too easily. And yet, Edward, your mind refuses to rest. You ruminate on loyalty, on betrayal, on the folly of placing friendship above politics, the loss of the dispensers, the cunning of Isabella, the precision of Mortimer. These lessons carve themselves into your consciousness with the sharpness of a blade. You are still king in name, but every action, every word is scrutinized by those who have already deemed your authority null. Your imprisonment is gentle in form, but harsh in effect. Guards treat you with civility, yet every corridor, every door, every hall is a reminder that power has abandoned you. The crown, once a symbol of command, now serves as a burden of shame. The barons, Isabella, and Mortimer have rewritten the rules of loyalty and authority, leaving you unmoored and uncrowned in spirit, if not in title. And the queen, Isabella watches silently from the background, her expression unreadable. The victory is hers, the crown secured for her son, the throne stabilized in her hands. You, Edward, are left to reckon with the consequences of favoritism, the perils of indulgence, and the fragility of the kingly office. When ambition, loyalty, and politics collide, you're alive, yet your reign is over. The crown may still rest on your head in ceremonial pretense, but it is no longer yours to command. You are a king uncrowned, trapped between memory and reality, a monarch whose failures have been exposed for all England to see. You are moved again, Edward, this time to Berkeley Castle, the fortress that will become both your prison and the stage for the final act of your life. The stones of the keep are cold, unyielding, and somehow accusatory, as though they remember every misstep, every foolish favor, every misjudged alliance that brought you here. The guards escort you with courtesy, but their eyes are careful, respectful enough for protocol, yet devoid of sympathy. You're a king in name only, a man stripped of power, yet still adorned with the hollow symbols of royalty. The mainstream historical fact: Edward II was imprisoned at Berkeley Castle in 1327, following his deposition. His captivity was ostensibly humane, with provisions for daily living. Yet the reality was grim. He had no freedom, no authority, and was constantly under watch by those loyal to Queen Isabella and Roger Mortimer. His confinement marked the penultimate stage before his death. And the quirky tidbit chroniclers note that while at Berkeley, Edward is said to have requested to play chess with the castle's guards, and he spent hours in quiet contemplation over the board. Perhaps it was strategy practice, perhaps an attempt to feel in control again. Either way, it was a small rebellion of intellect in a body trapped by circumstance. A king exercising his mind when his body and crown could no longer command obedience. The castle itself is a labyrinth of corridors, battlements, and locked chambers. Your rooms are well furnished, ostensibly comfortable, but the walls close in with the psychological weight of isolation. There is a sense of being observed constantly. Servants move with purpose. Guards linger at thresholds, faces neutral, but vigilant. Every footstep in the hall feels amplified, a reminder of your vulnerability. Historians still argue about the conditions of Edward's imprisonment. Some suggest he was treated with a measure of dignity befitting a former monarch, while others claim the conditions were harsher than records indicate, particularly given the political necessity of keeping him under strict control. Either way, his freedom is gone and his agency is strictly limited. The Spencer influence is long gone, and you are surrounded instead by those who see you as a liability, a pawn in the larger political game. Isabella and Mortimer now control the levers of power. They dictate the terms, decide what news reaches you, and manage the delicate optics of your continued survival. Your presence is necessary to maintain legitimacy for the crown, but your will matters little. In the corridors of Berkeley, whispers circulate. Some nobles, still loyal to the old king, attempt to negotiate in secret, offering aid or hope of restoration, but each attempt is crushed by Mortimer's vigilance. You are aware of plotting, yes, but powerless to act. Even the smallest gestures of rebellion could result in immediate reprisal. The castle's walls are both sanctuary and cage. And Edward, your thoughts inevitably drift. You think of Scotland, of Bannockburn, of Gaveston, of Despencer, and now of Isabella and Mortimer. Each chapter of your reign, each choice and misjudgment has led to this convergence of forces. The castle becomes a theater for memory, a hall where the past echoes louder than the present, and the future feels impossibly grim. The weight of kingship, once a tangible authority in the halls of Westminster, now presses down as a burden of regret and inevitability. Every morning, every mealtime, every candlelit night reminds you that while you live, your reign is over. The crown is merely an accessory, the symbols of power, nothing more than ornaments in a game you no longer control. Even as you pace your chamber, the cold stone beneath your feet grounding you in reality, a creeping awareness grows. The end is not far. The stage is set, the actors are in place, and the world outside waits for the final, strange, and tragic conclusion that will seal your fate. Berkeley Castle's corridors grow quieter as dusk falls. Edward, but your cell remains alive with the heavy weight of anticipation. The torches flicker, casting long, trembling shadows along the stone walls. You pace, counting the hours, measuring the cracks in the floor, feeling the chill seep into your bones. The castle is still, but there is a tension that presses against every stone, a silent prelude to events you cannot yet fully comprehend. Your guards are courteous but watchful, a constant reminder that freedom is an illusion. Each knock at your door, each creak of a hinge, sets your heart racing. You're acutely aware of your helplessness, the fragility of your position. Once, your word moved armies, dictated laws, and swayed nobles. Now, your voice carries little more weight than a whisper in the wind. Your crown heavy with symbolic authority, but devoid of real power. The mainstream historical fact: Edward II was kept under strict confinement in the final months of his life, with Isabella and Mortimer controlling access, correspondence, and the minimal privileges granted to him. This shadowed imprisonment allowed them to maintain legitimacy while plotting his final removal without immediate scandal. And a quirky tidbit: Some accounts mention that Edward attempted to cultivate a small garden in a corner of his cell courtyard. He grew herbs and flowers, perhaps in a gesture of defiance or as a distraction from the monotony of captivity. It is a delicate, almost absurd image. A king tending thyme and rosemary while his throne slips further from his grasp. Your mind drifts constantly. You replay every battle, every decision, every act of favoritism that has led you here. Gaveston's death, Bannockburn, the Spencers rise and fall. They swirl in your memory like autumn leaves caught in a storm. You're haunted not only by external threats, but by your own choices. The missteps that have left you exposed, isolated, and at the mercy of forces you once thought subordinate. Historians still argue about Edward's mental state in these final months. Some suggest he fell into depression, paralyzed by regret and helplessness. Others argue he maintained a strategic awareness, waiting for the slightest opportunity to reclaim some measure of control. Regardless, it is clear that confinement stripped him of most means to act independently. Every day, you hear fragments of the world outside your walls. Troops moving, the clatter of horses, the distant voices of courtiers and envoys. All reminders that life continues beyond your cell and that it proceeds without you. Isabella and Mortimer maneuver with a precision and cunning you can no longer influence. The web they have spun entangles every corner of your realm, every noble, every knight. You are trapped not just physically, but politically, psychologically, and symbolically. At night, the cell becomes a theater for reflection and dread. Candlelight dances across the walls, revealing cracks and imperfections in the stone that seem to mirror the cracks in your reign. You sit alone, sometimes whispering prayers, sometimes muttering to yourself, sometimes simply staring into the flickering shadows, wondering which is worse, the loss of power or the knowledge that your failure was so completely preventable. And yet, Edward, life continues within the cell. Guards bring food, fresh linens, and messages, all while maintaining a careful detachment. The ritual of daily life, mundane, monotonous, yet suffused with tension, becomes both a torment and a distraction. You cultivate small routines, pacing, chess with the guards, tending to the herbs. These acts, however trivial, are all you can control, and each is a tiny defiance against the inevitability of the world outside. The shadowed cell is no longer just a prison. It is a mirror reflecting every misjudgment, every misplaced trust, and every error that has brought Edward II to the brink. And as night deepens, the silence presses, whispering that the end, though unannounced, is close, and that it will arrive in a manner both strange and unforgettable. The air in Berkeley Castle is thick tonight, Edward, and not just with the smoke of torches or the cold stone's damp breath. There's something heavier here, an anticipation that presses on your chest, an invisible weight that reminds you that the stage is set for the end. You pace your cell, the candles casting flickering shadows that seem to reach for you, echoing the whispers of plotting that have shadowed your reign for years. You have survived battles, betrayals, and the slow collapse of your authority, yet the danger now is intimate, personal, and inescapable. Isabella and Mortimer have calculated every move, with precision, every step measured, every contingency accounted for. You are a king in chains, and the instruments of your demise are as cunning as the minds that conceived them. The mainstream historical fact: Edward II died in 1327 under mysterious circumstances, traditionally described as being killed with a red-hot poker or similar device inserted into his body, a method both secretive and symbolic, designed to avoid bloodshed while ensuring death. Chroniclers and historians have long debated the details, though most agree that Isabella and Mortimer orchestrated his final end. And a quirky tidbit: later accounts suggest that the strange weapon was chosen for its discreetness. The goal was to end Edward's life without visible marks that could cause scandal or martyrdom. Some chroniclers add that this was medieval ingenuity at its most macabre, a surgical execution disguised as an accident, almost like a grotesque precursor to spycraft. You feel the walls close in as the guards enter. They are calm, efficient, their faces masks of professional detachment. Nothing in their demeanor betrays the lethal purpose behind their routine gestures. Food is delivered, checked, and removed. The room is inspected with methodical care. And all the while, you sense the inevitability that your life, once crowned and commanding, now teeters on the edge of finality. Historians still argue whether Edward's death was intentional murder or a convenient assassination disguised as natural causes. Some suggest he was smothered, others poisoned, and others maintain the classic tale of the red-hot poker. The lack of contemporary forensic evidence has made the event a persistent mystery, feeding speculation, rumor, and legend for centuries. As the final moments approach, you have no allies, no dispenser to defend you, no army to rally. Even your closest companions are either gone or complicit. The castle, which once symbolized strength and fealty, now becomes a cage for inevitability. The torches flicker over your pale face. The stone beneath your feet feels impossibly hard. Every heartbeat is a countdown, each breath a reminder of mortality. And then it happens. The act is swift, precise, and horrifying in its quietness. The weapon, strange and secretive, delivers the final blow, removing you from a world you once dominated. Pain and shock, brief but absolute, mark the end of Edward II, King of England, alive in history, yet erased from power. Even in death, your story generates debate, fascination, and myth. Scholars continue to wonder, was it Isabella's vengeance, Mortimer's calculation, or a convergence of political necessity and cruelty? Some argue the method of your death was a symbolic message, a cautionary tale to all monarchs who dare favor one over the realm. Others insist it was simple pragmatism, quiet, effective, and utterly final. Your body lies in Berkeley, and the echoes of your reign ripple outward. The throne is no longer yours. Your favorites are gone. The queen and her ally now command the kingdom. Yet your death, executed with a weapon so strange and ingenious, secures a place in history that no battlefield, no council, and no baronial rebellion could have ever guaranteed. Edward II is dead, and the world continues without him. But the intrigue, the mystery, and the whispered tales of the weapon, strange, will follow your story forever. A king undone not just by enemies and mistakes, but by the eerie precision of assassination. The corridors of Berkeley are empty now, Edward, and yet your story lingers in every stone, every shadow, every whisper that travels through the castle long after your death. The strange weapon has done its work, but the tale is far from over. Across England, the news spreads like wildfire. The king has died under mysterious circumstances. Nobles, peasants, chroniclers, and poets all grapple with what they've heard, what they've seen, and what they imagine. The line between truth and tale begins to blur. The mainstream historical fact. Contemporary accounts vary, and no definitive evidence exists to confirm the precise manner of Edward II's death. Chroniclers like the Vita Edwardi Secundi report a gruesome, unusual method, while others hint at illness or neglect. The uncertainty fuels both rumor and scholarly inquiry for centuries. And the quirky tidbit, some storytellers later embellished the event, claiming that Edward's ghost haunted Berkeley, walking the halls in the flicker of torchlight, muttering about Gaveston, dispenser, and the folly of misplaced loyalty. Local folklore transformed the castle into a site of eerie fascination, complete with secret tunnels, hidden rooms, and the occasional spectral chess game. It seems even after death, Edward II couldn't escape the shadow of narrative, and perhaps wouldn't have wanted to. You, Edward, though absent, become a character in a story shaped by others. Isabella's victory, Mortimer's cunning, the Baron's revenge, they are all framed differently depending on who tells the tale. To some, you're a foolish king, undone by poor judgment and dangerous favorites. To others, a tragic figure, a monarch whose humanity clashed with the harsh realities of power. Scholars still argue whether the chronicler's biases favor Isabella's legitimacy or cast Edward as a martyr to loyalty and friendship. The debates are endless. Was the red-hot poker the true instrument of death or a later embellishment? Was it a carefully staged murder or an opportunistic execution disguised as something else? Each source offers a slightly different picture. Some insist it was deliberate. Others claim accidental neglect. Some suggest poison, and yet others focus on political manipulation. You, Edward, exist in all of these narratives. Sometimes king, sometimes victim, sometimes cautionary tale. And the public, of course, had its own interpretations. Bards sang songs, storytellers dramatized events, and common folk debated in marketplaces. The lines between history and legend blurred as details were exaggerated or omitted to suit the teller's purpose. A king who had once been mocked for his favorites now became a figure larger than life, a warning and a fascination all at once. Historians still argue whether your story, Edward, has been irrevocably distorted by political propaganda, romanticized tragedy, or a mixture of both. The lack of forensic evidence, combined with a medieval penchant for dramatic storytelling, ensures that the truth will always be filtered through layers of narrative, speculation, and interpretation. Even centuries later, Berkeley Castle is synonymous with mystery. Visitors walk its halls, imagining the final moments, debating the weapon, and pondering whether history remembers Edward II, the man, the king, or merely the cautionary symbol of favoritism, weakness, and political miscalculation. And perhaps that is fitting. A life so intertwined with intrigue, loyalty, and betrayal, ending in a manner that continues to challenge our understanding of truth. You are gone, Edward, yet your story refuses to settle. The line between history and legend remains unsettled, ensuring that every retelling, whether by scholar, bard, or casual observer, keeps your memory alive in all its tragic complexity. Even after centuries, Edward, your presence lingers in the halls of memory, in the chronicles of England, and in the imaginations of those who ponder your life and death. The king who once trampled across battlefields, courted favorites, and endured betrayals, now exists primarily as echoes, stories whispered, debated, and dissected long after the stones of Berkeley have cooled and the torches long extinguished. Your reign, short and tumultuous, left a mark as much in cautionary tale as in policy or conquest. The mainstream historical fact, Edward II's deposition and subsequent death, had profound consequences for England. His son, Edward III, ascended the throne, leading to a new era of monarchy that sought to stabilize governance and reassert royal authority. The events surrounding your fall demonstrated the dangerous intersection of personal favoritism, political ambition, and baronial power, a lesson that shaped English history for generations. In the quirky tidbit, even in modern times, reenactors and historians have debated how Edward II might have survived or thrived if he had simply loved chess more than favorites, or if he had followed the advice of the Queen rather than the whims of his heart. There are tales of people wandering Berkeley Castle, imagining the king tending herbs, playing chess, or pacing endlessly, lost in regret, a strangely human portrait amid the legend. The echoes are not just tales, they are lessons. Political maneuvering, loyalty, and personal attachments weave together to create outcomes no king can entirely predict. The decisions you made, the embrace of Despenser, the neglect of baronial concerns, the underestimation of Isabella and Mortimer, created a cascade of events that culminated in your deposition and death. Every modern historian, every chronicler, every storyteller who recounts your life focuses on the same tension: personal affection versus political necessity. Historians still argue over your legacy. Were you a weak and ineffectual monarch, undone by favoritism and inexperience? Or were you a tragic figure, a man whose loyalty and humanity clashed with the harsh realities of medieval kingship? Each interpretation reveals as much about the storyteller as it does about Edward VII himself. Your life also continues to fascinate in popular culture. Plays, novels, and historical fiction dramatize your reign, speculating on motives, friendships, and the mysterious weapon that ended it all. Scholars, too, remain fascinated by the political and social structures your reign exposed, the vulnerabilities that a kingdom faces when the king's personal choices outweigh statecraft. And perhaps, most poignantly, your story endures because it is deeply human. You are ambitious, yet flawed, loyal, yet naive, commanding, yet vulnerable. The echoes of your fall remind every ruler, every student of history, every curious mind that power is fragile, and that the combination of love, friendship, and political miscalculation can topple even a crowned head. As you rest in the pages of history, Edward, the lessons ripple outward. The castles, the barons, the queen, the exiles, and the conspirators all fade in the story. Yet the moral remains. A king's choices, both personal and political, reverberate far beyond the walls of his court, shaping the kingdom and the memory of the man who once wore the crown. Your reign is over. Your life ended. But the echoes of Edward II, the boy king, the flawed monarch, the man undone by friendship, love, and ambition, continue to resonate, teaching, warning, and captivating long after the final torch in Berkeley Castle has guttered. Now, as the pages of Edward II's life close before you, imagine the kingdom settling into silence. The torches flicker, the guards' footsteps fade, and the cold stones of Berkeley Castle exhale centuries of memory. You've walked through halls of power, witnessed betrayal, and felt the intimate tension of loyalty and favoritism. History is no longer just a series of dates and battles. It's alive in the choices, the emotions, and the consequences that ripple outward from each decision. Think of the young boy king, crowned too early, navigating love and friendship, and the heavy burden of expectation pressing against his shoulders. Reflect on Gaveston's charm and mischief, the dispenser's audacity, and the queen whose quiet fury transformed into decisive action. The alliances, betrayals, and political maneuvers all converge to a single, inexorable end: the death of a king by a weapon strange, in a chamber shadowed by secrecy and history. What lessons linger in the quiet moments? That power is fragile and favor can be fatal, that loyalty can blind and ambition can consume, that even kings adorned in gold and guided by advisors are not immune to the currents of human passion and political intrigue. And perhaps, most importantly, that stories endure, sometimes more vividly than the lives themselves. As you settle back, maybe with the soft hum of a fan or the rustle of sheets around you, remember that history is both cautionary and mesmerizing. It whispers through time, connecting us to those who came before, and reminding us that every choice, every trust, and every alliance shapes not just the present, but the echoes that follow. Sweet dreams.